All right, everyone, welcome to today's show. Mark Devlin is back with us. We did a cracking show about a year ago, and yeah, how's it been going, Mark? What have you been up to?
Hello, John. Yeah, good to be back with you. Keeping busy as ever.
Yeah,
I do a whole bunch of talks and presentations pretty much all year round. I'm constantly on tour. And I've just completed the new book, which we're going to talk about today, of course. Well, I say just completed it. It was a few months ago. This is it. No one's dad's a plumber. I wrote it in record time, actually. I got it done in 2 months, January and February. The first book that I did in the Musical Truth series took 13 months to write and about 5 years to research. But I've done a few of these now and I've whittled the process right down. So I turned this one around in just less than 2 months. And I got to the point round about 2014, 2015, where I was researching the first Musical Truth book, where I'd come to comprehend that the music industry was used for social control and the sowing of certain agendas within society. And it caused me to fall slightly out of love with it for a while. I became very disillusioned, and I realized that many of the bands and the musicians I'd looked up to weren't quite who I thought they were. And this applied also to DJs that I'd looked up to, radio and club DJs who'd been a personal inspiration to me. I realized that many of them were false heroes and not who I thought they were. And I became quite bitter for quite a while, to the point that I didn't really have any interest in listening to music anymore. And I thought to myself, I'm just going to have to learn to live without music because I can't trust these people anymore. And all the songs and all the sounds and all the scenes that used to mean so much to me just don't hold that appeal anymore. But I very quickly realized that I couldn't go long without having music in my life. I definitely thrive on it. I definitely need it as a coping mechanism, as a form of escapism, especially when you start to absorb yourself in lots of dark and devastating information, which can be quite low density and quite harsh and quite difficult to deal with. I think you need some kind of diversion to take yourself away from that when it all starts to get a bit too much. And music had already always fulfilled that role for me. And around the time that I was putting these first books together, I was working full time as a private hire driver. So I was driving people mainly to and from Heathrow Airport from Oxford and surrounds.
mm,
So I was on the road for many, many hours during the day. And I used to always set off with a big stack of CDs in the car with me because I was old school like that. I just burnt all the podcasts that I would listen to and YouTube videos and such to CD. And I'd spend all day just slotting these CDs into the car and absorbing all this information. And when all the speech based stuff got too much, I'd switch to the music and just absorb some tunes instead. When I was a DJ, I was playing hip hop and R&B and other forms of black music like reggae dancehall and a bit of soul funk, a bit of soulful house and garage. And when I started to realize the extent to which these genres were being used to push certain social engineering ideas, and more devastating than that, to push ideas of Satanism and dark occult ritualistic practices and symbolism and get some of these ideas across, I really lost interest in listening to that stuff anymore. But I couldn't cut music out altogether. So I had to do a switch and I jumped over to the soulful house genre. And so the music that I play now on the weekly Sound of Now show that I do, that I put out on Mixcloud every Saturday, is music of that nature. It's soulful, uplifting, feel good, positive vibes. It's heavy on gospel infused house music. There's a lot of disco style house as well, and a lot of just vocal house. And this is really the only contemporary music now that I can stand to listen to because with anything else, all I can see is the agenda. And with Soulful House, I really feel that it has pretty much flown under the radar in terms of escaping some of these obvious system pushing agendas. And I think the main reason for that is because of the demographic that it's aimed at, which is basically people of my sort of generation. So the social engineers are always concerned with young hearts, souls, and minds. They always want to manipulate and coerce the younger generation. So
mm,
that's why whatever music is in their crosshairs is primarily aimed at that sort of demographic. So by the time you get to my stage in life, they don't really bother with people like me. We're done.
Yeah.
We're finished.
Yeah.
We're just irrelevant to them.
Hmm.
Any kind of mind controlled job they were ever going to do on my generation, they did it 20 or 30 years ago. So they kind of let people like us have our music, I think, because
Mm,
they think we just can't be bothered with you lot anymore. You're not important to us. In a blink of an
mm,
eye, you'll be gone,
mm.
and the next generation will be along to replace you. So, because of that, I think Soulful House, because it's aimed at a slightly older demographic, is not really pushing all the same stuff that many of these other styles are. And that's why it's, dare I say, cleaner and purer and much more healthy to listen to. And I can hear it when I listen to agenda music, the stuff that is being aimed at Gen Z, the current
Yeah.
youthful generation.
Mm.
It's just so toxic to me. It's palpable. I can just hear all the bad frequencies, all the stuff that's getting stripped into the recordings, the auto tune that's used, the various production methods. All of it just seems so artificial, so digital, so electronic, and so cut off from nature and spirituality and just regular ways of doing things.
Yeah.
And I think that's the point. It's a generational thing. And so
Uh,
our generation, we've had the jobs done on us. They've done a number on our sort of demographic, and now they've moved on.
yeah, it's incredible. Yeah, I always used to say, you know you're old when you're kind of moaning that the music was better in my time, but it probably was.
Oh, it
You know,
actually was,
it
yeah.
actually was. That's the thing. You know,
I
I've reached
find
that
myself
age.
sounding like
Yeah,
my dad in the 80s. I can remember my dad shouting up the stairs to me, "Turn that bloody rubbish off. What's
yeah,
that nonsense? Wasn't like that in my day."
yeah,
And now I say that about my daughter's music,
yeah,
except I do feel that I've got a point
yes.
because at least the music I did listen to was good.
Yeah, I want to talk to you a little bit more into that. I think that's such an important subject to go into, so deep. I mean, I kind of got into garage music in the mid to late 90s because there was that crossover from that like Chicago house, and it kind of fused. Eventually, over the next couple of years, it fused with like the London sound to what would be created. Some people called it speed garage, but for me, it was just yeah UK garage, and it had its very own distinct style, and I really liked it because it had like people like Artful Dodger who wrote this really beautiful melodic, almost how would you describe it? It was almost like a concert style,
Orchestral stuff
orchestra. So
type
yeah,
stuff.
let me say it was almost like an orchestral, arrangement in their music, and it really had that soul to it, and I loved it, and I really connected with it. And then what happened was it started to become a little bit how would we say, too urban to the point where it became like they were just rapping on every single song, and then it kind of I felt like it lost a bit of the soul, and you had like the Casualty theme music over some of the garage, and I just this is it, it's done for me now, and then it moved into grime, and it was like it kind of quickly dissipated, but and then I lost a lot of love for music, and then it came back for me in around 2005 when the electro house scene really kicked off. And I felt like it had that fire to it, that spark. I could feel like I could really connect to it. And I actually started my own electro house rave in London. And, I really felt it from the inside. I was right in the heart and the pulse of the London club scene. So then when I started the actual party itself, I felt I could really connect to the people that were coming. And it blew up from 30 people in the first event to 3,000 people after 10 events regularly. And I felt like I was
What
really
was the
in
brand there? What was it
it was
called?
well, it was called Sick on the Dance Floor, and maybe we're going off at a tangent here a little bit, but um, when I
And
used to,
what venue was that?
I started it off in Muswell Hill called Club You Wish, 30 people. Then after that, we got asked to play in the second room at Canvas. It's on near the Cross. You had the Cross Key, at Bagley's. I think it used to be called Bagley's.
King's Cross, yeah.
Yeah, and then after that, we were getting 200 people coming each time. And then the Cross, the people that were promoting at the Cross said, "Would you like to do a second room at the Cross?" That was only after about 3 or 4 events. And then we moved it to SE1 Club. And we were getting like, as soon as we moved there and we started flyering and just pushing out a little bit more, we got the 3,000 people in on the first night. And it was incredible explosion. But the name Sick on the Dance Floor came because I'm going to say you don't have to use this for your episode, but I might just say it. Okay, so when I used to do MDMA, um, it was like and did it in your tribe because the thing is, the club for me is like a church. You had the music, the beats, the frequency. If you're with high consciousness people, it is almost like a kind of a church-like experience. And when you did the MDMA, it actually opened up my heart chakra, and I felt a lot of love, empathy, warmth. I wanted to connect. I wanted to co-create with the people around me. And but one of the things that was like the running joke was whenever I was coming up on this MDMA, I would always puke on the dance floor. And it was it was like a running joke amongst everyone that knows me. And so I actually thought, you know what? I'm going to call a night that. So I called it Sick on the Dance Floor. And then it became like a meme and everything else like that. And yeah, it was quite successful, to be honest with you.
I remember being at a night called Sunny Side Up many, many years
I
ago.
know
Don't
it.
know if you remember that.
I do know it.
I think it
Brixton,
was
isn't
in
it? Was it
Holborn, I
Brixton?
thought it
Oh,
was, but
okay.
maybe.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Anyway, I was at this night, and it's exactly as you've just said. I was standing next to this guy, and then spontaneously out of nowhere, he's suddenly like all over the dance floor. And I was there with my girlfriend at the time, who became my wife, and we just said to each other, "Oh, I know what's going on there. I know why he's throwing up like that because there was a lot of it around." But yeah, happy days, man. Happy memories.
Yeah, it was great
And
days. Yeah.
yeah. And you touch on a very important point there because I've mentioned this in a few of my presentations. The tribal communal aspect
Yeah.
of clubbing and nightlife. So there's a quote that I use from Moby, the electronic dance music producer Moby. And he was interviewed for BBC Four's How Dance Music Changed the World documentary in, I think it's 2017. And he says to the interviewer, if we were sitting here 10,000 years ago, you might ask, what do you think is causing these people to dance in a ritualistic fashion around this campfire while the embers, sort of the reflection of the embers glow in their eyes? Well, a shaman is tapping out the rhythm on a bongo or some sort of skin drum. He said, you've just described a tribal ceremony from 10,000 years ago and clubland last night. And the point that he's making is that one of the reasons why dance music and club culture has been so appealing to so many people all around the world for so many years is because it's tapping into a very primal aspect of the human condition. And we seem to gravitate naturally, it's just built into us inherently, towards rhythm, also dance, expressing yourself in a ceremonial manner through dance, also mind altering drugs or compounds that change human consciousness. And the important aspect, the glue that holds it all together, is the communal experience. So that does accurately describe an early acid house rave
Mm.
or a night in a super club like Ministry of Sound or a tribal ceremony from 10,000 years ago, because in the club version of it, the rhythm comes from the dance music, that steady pounding rhythm that's very consistent. The mind altering consciousness aspect of it comes through the drugs, whether it's MDMA or whatever the drug of choice may be. And then you've got the dancing, and the visuals is also an important thing. Signs, sigils, symbols, which in early acid house raves and in many of the club nights express themselves through the icons and the motifs that were being used to advertise the night, that were prevalent in the logos. And then the communal spirit of everything, which is large numbers of people, primarily young people in the dance music version of it, coming together and pooling their consciousness and their experiences in a shared communal fashion.
Mm.
So
I agree.
what
That's
the yeah,
yeah.
what the social engineers behind the
Mm.
dance music phenomenon seem to have been tapping into is this very primal aspect of ourselves that seems to gravitate naturally towards all that stuff. And that I think explains a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. I was kind of onto the same conclusions as well with my research, is that they've co-opted, they've hijacked that shamanic, ritualistic experience, that church-like religious experience, if you want to call it that, and they've kind of done that through, like you said, the kind of it's like frequency hacking, right? Frequency engineering. So the bass lines is sort of an entrainment of the nervous system, isn't it? And the repetitive beats that can kind of induce that trance-like state, even the name trance of the music, right? And then the lyrics, they're like mantras, they're like invocations that they can use to affect us on the unconscious level. And then you have the light, the symbol usage, the strobe lasers, the kind of archetypal imagery and the decor and stuff like that. And then of course you get into like the crowd, which is like an energy battery, and it becomes almost like an energy vortex. and then you have the highs, the euphoric highs from the ecstasy, the orgasmic states, and then maybe the crashes as well. And this all creates like charged plasma that's like ripe for harvesting. And I know you've kind of gone into this as well with your work, but it's almost like Judge Jules sits at in the as the judge in the courtroom, but he's almost like the high priest, right? The DJ, and they can almost set the pace for an engineered ritual, which can actually negatively loosh our energy, right? And maybe we can talk a little bit about those mechanisms as well.
Sure. Well, I've observed many DJs. Pete Tong is the one that springs to mind. I've just got this piece of footage in mind of him presiding over a crowd of must be about 10,000 people at a festival,
Mm,
and the camera's behind him. And then he just decides to put his hands in the air, start clapping his hands. And immediately, 10,000 people in the crowd in front of him start clapping their hands. So he's made that decision to do that himself through his own bodily actions, and he's coerced or persuaded 10,000 other people to mimic those actions. That is a lot of power for one individual to wield over a crowd. And it's very akin to a religious gathering, as you said.
mm,
It's like a church service on a Sunday morning where you've got the priest up at the pulpit delivering the sermon, and he's affecting the consciousness and the behaviors and the mind state of the congregation.
mm,
A few hours before that happens on a Sunday morning, on a Saturday night, you've got the same scenario being played out in the club, where instead of the pulpit, it's the DJ booth. Instead of the preacher, it's the DJ.
mm.
And instead of psalms or hymns being sung, it's dance music anthems being put out there. I did a Q&A earlier today for my Patreon, and one of the questions was about the DJ Sasha, superstar DJ of the 90s
Yeah.
going into the noughties, real name Alexander Coe, but he was known as DJ Sasha. And somebody was saying, oh, what happened to DJ Sasha? Because he used to be so prominent and influential, and he kind of fizzled out a bit. His career seemed to get surpassed by the likes of Carl Cox and Paul van Dyk and various others in the 2000s. But in the late 90s, Sasha was like the biggest news in the DJ world. And I can remember a Mix Mag, sorry, not Mixcloud, Mix Mag cover. Mix Mag was the leading dance music publication that chronicled the evolution of dance music in those early years. And they'd put Sasha on the front cover, and he was mimicking a Christ-like messianic pose, like he was some sort of religious leader, some religious icon, you know? And that really is the way that DJs were revered in those early days, and many of them still are. I keep an eye on Paul van Dyk's Facebook page because he's just someone that I study, because as far as I'm concerned, he's pushing agendas and he's a major asset of the social engineers that are using electronic dance music to just get certain ideas out there. And so I read the comments on his Facebook page, and literally with every post that he makes, you'll get comments from his fan base saying things like, Paul, you are my God. I bow down and worship you. I named my firstborn child after you. You are incredible. You've changed my life. So these DJs, these manufactured heroes, because you don't get to those kind of influential positions unless you've been gifted them, unless you've been chosen for that role, are literally fulfilling positions as religious icons and spiritual mentors to so many people. And like I say, that's an incredible amount of power for one individual to have, whether or not they're controlled or to what degree they're being directed by handlers and managers or whatever. But it's just a reminder of how powerful genres, fads, trends, scenes can be. We're talking about electronic dance music now,
Mm.
but you could apply these same principles to heavy metal, heavy rock, punk rock, hip hop, any genre you'd care to mention, because they all have their manufactured heroes that are put out there in the same way as some of the names we're mentioning here.
Mm. Yeah, fantastic. And so those manufactured heroes, what do you think their primary objective is, agenda is? If we maybe start with the DJs, for instance.
Well, yeah, we can start with them because I think it differs from genre to genre, scene to scene, name to name. So it's not that every band and every musician is pushing the same social engineering agendas. Some of them might be helping to push ideas of climate change. Some of them might be helping to push ideas of transgenderism or whatever that's all about. With some of them, it will be pushing, well, to take your example of DJs and electronic dance music producers. In my view, what these scenes are being used for is the glorification of transhumanism and AI. So they're pushing the idea of humanity merging with technology. And this is the type of society that we can see we're edging ever closer towards more dangerously with every passing day. So we know that they want to take human society towards a sort of smart grid, Internet of Things, Chinese communist style social credit system scenario where we're linked to a central bank digital currency, where our every move is tracked and monitored and surveilled, where everything we do, every transaction we undertake is recorded against our names and all the data and all the detail that's held about us on a central database.
Mm.
And that information is used to formulate very accurate pictures of everything we do with our lives and just to control us in ever more minute ways. And I think electronic dance music is playing its role in selling to a generation, again, of younger people, the idea that electronic ways of doing things are just great and they're the future. So when you look at a lot of these festivals, the theming of them, the imagery that's used, the branding, the naming of them, the decor, the lighting, the laser shows, the strobes, they're very digital, very electronic in nature. They're not at all organic or analog anymore. And it's just playing its part in edging human society ever closer towards completely digital electronic ways of doing things and away from the way things used to be done in previous eras. So we can single out the big name DJs and we can single out all these electronic dance music producers and say that's the agenda they've been given to push, because that's one aspect of the New World Order master plan that they're trying to coerce humanity towards. And then, as I say, you can take other bands and other scenes, other styles of music, and you might be able to home in on other detail in terms of what their allotted roles are. But as we're talking about dance music and DJs, as far as I'm concerned, that's what this scene has really been all about. So going all the way back
Mm.
to the acid house rave scene and the way that that was used to lay the foundations for everything that would follow in its wake. The superclub era, the explosion in electronic dance music, which was formulated on British shores, and it was probably coming out of the Tavistock Institute to a
Oh,
certain
don't say
degree.
that. It's going to ruin my clubbing memories.
Well, we have to come to terms with these things,
Yeah,
sadly.
yeah.
Uh, and from Britain, it was exported around the world. But I think you could certainly make a case for all of this stuff starting on British shores. Obviously, British electronic dance music would have been inspired by a lot of the stuff coming out of America, disco music and early
Frankie
house music.
Knuckles, wasn't it?
Yeah, early
Yeah,
house
yeah,
music.
yeah.
But there was a very British slant that was put on it through acid house and
Right.
rave
Yeah.
and these open air events and then the super clubs. And that was the aspect of the culture that got exported around the rest of the world. And now it's no exaggeration to say that this coming weekend, this Saturday night, in pretty much every developed country around the world, you're going to find young people going out to a bar or a club and they're going to be listening to electronic dance music delivered by DJs, played off of laptops in electronic form, off of WAV or MP3 audio files, delivered via something like Serato or Tractor. So it's all very electronic.
Mm.
And that'll be happening in every country around the world. Such has been the degree of the reach of this particular culture. And if this whole thing has been a psyop, and I contend that to a certain extent it has, I think the social engineers can consider it to have been a very successful one in terms of the huge amount of reach that it's had.
Mm. But I mean, it was always. I'm just trying to think back to the kind of the early days of sort of acid house and stuff like that. It hasn't become. Would you say it's become more electronic then? Because I know that you're back in the day, you'd hear people on vinyl. There was a bit more of an organic, human feel to even the mixing. You know, when when they'd mix the tracks together, I quite liked it when they were slightly out and then they'd correct it. I don't like these kind of pre-made mixes that they're perfect, because that feels too robotic to me. There's perfection for me is imperfection. I like to hear like there's a human behind the decks, and I kind of like that. There's an organic feel to it. But are you saying that now it's just become totally electronic to the point of you don't even feel like human soul behind the music?
Well, it has. You still get a few old school vinyl sets spun by DJs,
Yeah.
and they're billed as such because they're such a special thing when they do take place. But as you say, everything's come to the point now where mixes are, they just sound so cold and clinical, and they're perfect.
Yeah.
And like you, I like a bit of imperfection. When they sound absolutely flawless,
Yes.
it doesn't feel like a human has created that. It just feels like it's all been done by machines. And you've got sync buttons now
Yeah.
on these software programs where the DJ doesn't even have to mix by ear anymore, like you
Mm.
used to have to. It used to require the DJ to use their skill to match the beats themselves in their headphones and,
Yeah.
create that mix live. And sometimes they'd screw up a little bit. They'd have to
Mm.
correct the mix and you'd hear it.
Yeah.
And I used to like when the needle would skip every now and again when you're listening to
Oi, yeah. Yeah.
vinyl. Bit of crackle
Yeah.
on the vinyl, bit of cue burn at the beginning, needle skips every now and again. It just reminds you that you're listening to an authentic live mix and you've got a DJ that's controlling the situation and he's, or she's, they're doing their thing. And it just doesn't feel like that anymore. It's just become too perfect.
Yeah, exactly. Clinical,
And
AI like. Yeah.
yeah, and I'm just thinking about the way in which the music is delivered now. So very little of it is delivered off of vinyl or any kind of analog form.
Mm.
It's all electronic from the moment it's produced in the studio to the moment it's played on the radio station or the moment it's played out of somebody's phone or the moment it's played in the club. And I just think a lot has been lost there. It's a real shame because with many of those formats and those ways of doing things, you've lost a lot of the human input and the heart and the soul of the art form has been lost to machinery.
Definitely. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for agreeing with me on that, because I've often felt that. And that's why I get put off by going to clubs and parties for that, mainly that reason. I also wanted to ask you, because I want to come back to the electronic thing, but I also want to ask you, I noticed in the club scene that the predominant drug of that kind of era would precipitate the musical style. So I noticed that, well, if you kind of go back to, well, when I started clubbing like the mid 90s, obviously it was like ecstasy, speed, maybe some acid, maybe a little bit of acid, I don't know, but mainly those two, and cocaine maybe. But I noticed that that kind of influenced the music to be very fast, like very high energy. Like you had that kind of like, that kind of trancey house style that build up, because it was a referent of people's internal state from the drugs they were taking. Right. I noticed that when I was in the, electro house scene doing my raves, people started taking more ketamine. That started coming in more and more. And then what you noticed is like the parties at that time on a Saturday night would start to play very slow, very repetitive, very kind of like boring, almost just like running a pen across a radiator, like that kind of music. And I noticed that that was almost because it was like the drug scene was actually inferring the music at the time. And I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts into that, and maybe that was also a kind of a social engineering thing to direct consciousness, the consciousness of the clubbers, the feeling of the clubbers, maybe move that into a particular direction from the acid scene right at the beginning to ecstasy, maybe even cocaine before acid came about and ecstasy came about, to then where we're at now.
Well, it's long seemed to me that every genre or fad or trend or scene has its drug of choice. It
Mm,
just seems to go hand in hand with the music. So punk rock was very much involved with heroin.
yeah,
Uh, Rock music, more conventional rock music, would have been cocaine and a bit of weed and some speed, I guess. And there was a lot of amphetamines around in the 60s, sort of mod scene. And then when you get into dance music and black music, smoking weed has always been a big thing, particularly in reggae music and also in hip hop. So within hip hop clubs and black music clubs, the music styles tend to be a lot slower because a lot of people in there are smoking weed and they just want to nod their heads and just absorb the beats and stuff, but nothing's too fast and frantic. Whereas in dance music clubs, the drugs are different, so the music is much more energetic and pounding. And by the time you got to the 90s, the mid 90s, and the influx of the genre known as trance, which you just mentioned. What's in a name? Well, it was called trance because the music was being deliberately, systematically created to put the clubbers into that kind of mind state. And it was going hand in hand with a lot of the drugs, mainly MDMA, ecstasy. I never used to do E back in the day. Kind of wish I had now, but I was always too squeaky clean back then. I didn't used to smoke weed either when I was playing hip hop because it just never got on with me. But from what I understand, when you get the highs and the lows in many of these dance music records, particularly in trance, you get the breakdowns. So that the beats will build to a crescendo, and then there'll be this big crash, and then everything will just take a dip, and it will become almost silent in the track. And then you'll start to hear the chords coming in very, very slowly, very, very gradually. And they'll start to build and build and build and build slowly and gradually. And I've been in clubs and I've viewed the reaction of the crowd when this is happening. And they're just so much in anticipation of that big crash when it comes in. And you hear it building and building and building. And the atmosphere on the dance floor is just palpable and so tense. And then crash, in it comes, back come the beats, and the strobes come on, the lasers come on, the club absolutely erupts, and the energy levels go through the roof, and everyone just starts leaping into the air and just going crazy. And that seems to be mimicking the rush that occurs during the mind, the consciousness of somebody that's undergoing an experience on these drugs. The music was being created to mimic the brain chemistry, the changes that were going on in the consciousness of the clubbers. And so that's a very potent example of music going hand in hand with drug taking.
Mm.
And it gives some insight into what that whole scene was all about, which was in part, I guess, to get an entire generation hooked on taking certain substances. And that's not me necessarily bashing it, because many people have contacted me over the years and they've told me of some very beneficial, very positive experiences they've had on mind altering drugs, from LSD to ecstasy to many other
Mm.
things. And many of them have told me that years and years of going to clubs and doing this stuff caused them to snap out of their mind controlled trance, which had them believing all the lies of organized society and believing what the mainstream news was telling them, and causing them to get into a critically thinking, questioning mind state, to the point that now they don't believe a damn word the government
Mm.
tells them or the mainstream media tells them. So that can be viewed as a pretty positive outcome, I guess.
Yeah.
So, like I say, I'm not necessarily frowning
Mm.
on whatever behaviors anyone chooses to undertake in their leisure time. I'm just pointing out that I think these scenes would have been social engineering agendas. And to a very large extent, they were being used as experimental test beds,
Mm.
and the participants being used as lab rats,
Yeah.
guinea pigs,
Mm.
without their consent, without their knowledge. And a lot of the results would have been getting monitored and surveilled and viewed and recorded. And actually, many people that used to go to early raves and acid house parties have told me this. They've said that they often felt like there were certain parties within these events which were observing them. And
I've
they
got a whole
were,
section on that I wanted to ask you about, actually. Yeah,
right.
that's really interesting. Yeah.
And they've said that it really felt like they were getting watched. They
Mm.
couldn't quite put their finger on it, but it's like their activities were getting viewed and it's like they were getting recorded. And they always seem to get this feeling at these parties. And going back a generation from that, I've had people that were present at many of these so-called free festivals, which were precursors to the raves, I guess, if you like. We're going back to the late 60s, early 70s. There was the Isle of Wight Festival in 1970. There was the first Glastonbury Festival, also in 1970.
Mm.
And there were early free festivals at Stonehenge and Windsor. And many of the people that were present at these said that they too felt that they were getting observed and monitored. There were lots of drugs and rock music and this communal sort of hippie spirit, all these people coming together. But many people felt like it wasn't entirely organic and there was something a little bit suspect about it. So it's interesting that those comments have come out of the early free festival scene and also the early acid house rave scene. And to me, it confirms the suspicions in my very suspicious mind that there was a bit more to these scenes than we may have known about.
Yeah, that's fascinating because I've actually been finding that out myself a little bit, and I'm going to kind of you tell me before I do. I just wanted to ask you then. So just to kind of clarify, then, do you think that which came first, the chicken or the egg? Do you think the drugs came in and that influenced the music, or do you think the music came in and then that's what, you know, created the drug scene, or that specific drug?
Yeah, well, it's a good question and it's a difficult one to answer. And I certainly feel that with some scenes, they may well get going off their own back in an organic grassroots kind of way.
Hmm.
And they might start to appeal to certain people, certain groups. But that appeal is very quickly going to get noted by those whose jobs it is to keep an eye on the emergence of fads and trends and scenes. Because social engineers coming out of places like Tavistock, they want to be the ones in charge of whatever fads, trends, scenes, movements people are getting into. They don't want these things to flourish under their own steam. So if they see one that's starting to do just that, very quickly, I think there are going to be facilities, apparatus in place to make sure they get steered off in certain desired directions.
Mm,
So that's the point where they're going to send their own types in and start to influence the way things go. And that's probably the point where many of the drugs will start to arrive. So in my second Musical Truth book,
mhm.
I've got two chapters on the acid house rave scene. And it's my suspicions about where these movements got going from. And I've noted that in the early days of these big acid house parties, we're going back to about 1989. So there were some early sort of warehouse parties and some other raves and stuff, which took place in 87 and 88. But as 88 gave way to 89, you had promoters like Tony Colston Hayter of the Sunrise brand. And there was this guy, I think his name was Jeremy Taylor. He did these events called the Toffs Balls. And these were events specifically aimed at public school boarders, same sex boarders. And it was aimed at them going out and partying, letting their hair down, meeting members of the opposite sex, doing some drugs, enjoying some dance music, and getting involved in things that they never normally would have done through their stuffy, sort of conservative public school kind of upbringing. And there were many others as well, you know, posh public school boys from wealthy families, conservative Tory types that were promoting many of these parties. Now, these aren't natural candidates for promoting parties of this nature in my book. This goes back to the title of this book, I guess, No One's Dad's a Plumber. And the reason I called it that is because I've identified this dynamic of the fathers of so many prominent rock musicians, bands, not coming from the regular working class backgrounds that you might expect them to. So very few plumbers, very few builders and dockers and lorry drivers and construction workers, but plenty of lieutenant colonels, navy admirals and Freemasons, judges, diplomats, government ministers, this sort of thing. And thinking back to those acid house parties, lots of them weren't getting promoted by people from regular working class backgrounds who just wanted to make a quick buck or might have been really interested in the music or really interested in the drugs. They seemed to be more the domain of those who were fulfilling an agenda. Yes, they wanted to make shitloads of money out of it, so they were doing it on a massive scale, but they were running it as a kind of business empire in a more Tory conservative spirit of entrepreneurialism, which kind of suited the zeitgeist of those times. And it just leads me to suspect that by that point in the game, 1989 onwards, the scene had been commandeered, it'd been hijacked, infiltrated. And from that point, it was going in a direction which suited the controllers of society. And the grassroots organic start that it may well have had was starting to dissipate. And this will be the way with so many scenes. I think it was probably that way with the hip hop scene
Mm.
coming out of America, you know, rap music coming out of New York initially.
Yeah.
I think that probably had a fairly grassroots organic start. But when the potential of it started to get viewed, the corporations got involved, the banksters got involved, the social engineers got involved, and they wanted to make sure it went their way.
It gets absorbed into the machine, doesn't it? But I think they
Yeah.
let a lot of things bubble up organically because they can see the talent in it. And I think they don't try to rein it in too tight to begin with. They give a lot of leash, don't they, to begin with? Because at first they just want to see this person can make them a lot of money. When they can make them a lot of money, I think we can do even more with them at this point. You know, I think maybe the Beatles may have bubbled up organically to begin with in their early stuff, and then they actually fit the perfect model to be used and engineered and played with, and you know they were kind of the perfect clay models for that, right? I think that was and Eminem came from a lot of righteous anger and trauma and kind of, and he created his like alter ego for that, Slim Shady, and they thought, wow, this guy's got a lot of that inner fire, that inner flame, and they let him sort of bubble up. But then after a certain point, they hijack that and they kind of lead that off into a different direction, don't they? Maybe Amy Winehouse as well. There's a few like happens like that, yeah.
They seem also to trash their own scenes. They trash their own creations. I don't know if you've noticed this, but they seem to build up a scene
Mm,
and allow it to be really popular and really influential for a certain period, usually a
yeah.
few years. And then they seem to systematically destroy it. So I'm thinking back to the golden years of hip hop, which most purists would put at, I guess, 88 to about 94. That was the real high point of rap and hip hop. And then from 95 onwards, it really started to die a death. And a lot of the blame for that is placed at the door of Sean Combs, P. Diddy, Puff Daddy, through his Bad Boy Records label. He was taking hip hop culture and turning it into something that it never previously was. So the glorification of material brands, consumerism, glorification of gangster lifestyles. There'd been a bit of that going on in the previous years, but Puffy kind of took it to the next level and just pushing bling and champagne and all this nonsense. And that was it. The high point of hip hop had passed. And as the years went on, it just regressed and degraded further and further to the point of what we have now, which isn't even worthy of being called rap and hip hop because it bears no relation to what went before. And I played a set about 3 weekends ago at the Stand in the Light Festival in Cumbria, and it was amazing. It was Saturday night, and I got given 2.5 hours, and I could play anything I wanted. So I thought, I'm going to play a lot of 90s to early noughties dance and trance anthems because I never used to play this stuff in the clubs at the time. I was too busy playing hip hop and black
Mhm.
music. And I played 2.5 hours of this stuff, and it was absolutely amazing. I was buzzing. The energy was incredible. People were loving it, hands in the air the whole way. And I was just thinking, the tunes that I'm playing are pretty much from about 96, 97 to about 2001, 2002. That's the cutoff. And that was the real high point of those particular styles of music. After 2002 or thereabouts, I think it all started to go downhill. So you get these periods of about 5 or 6 years, maybe, if you're lucky, where everything's great, and then it just starts to fizzle out. You mentioned UK Garage earlier. So I guess we could say that got going in about 97 with the speed garage scene, Tough Jam, and, people like that. And by 2002, it's probably on a downward
Probably
trajectory.
2000, I think it was going at
2000.
2000, 2001. It was like
Yeah.
dead. It was dead for me. Yeah.
Yeah, so you had Luck and
Mm.
Neat and Artful Dodger and Norris the Boss Windross and guys like
I think
this.
Luck and Neat with that for me, that was the first splinter in the whole thing.
Mm,
Because it was just like kind of it was more rapping over the top, like it lost that soul level, that kind of Chicago soul housey thing that kind of
mm,
came across and infused with the like the urban vibe, and then it went too much down that path of just making it a little bit too, I'm a bad boy, rude boy, a bit like that, and it kind of lost its essence, I think, for me.
yeah. And another scene that we might mention is punk rock in the UK.
Hmm.
So the punk scene pretty much got going in London at the hands of Malcolm McLaren, the manager of the Sex Pistols.
Yeah.
And McLaren was an occultist, apart from anything else, but he was also a sort of bohemian who had an interest in shaping and molding culture. And I don't think his heart was really in punk music. He was just using it for the shock value of it, for the controversy of it, because McLaren used to like the art of making things worse. He used to like creating controversy for its own sake. He was a situationist. He adhered to Situation International, which is this French avant garde anarchist highbrow art movement. And it's all about taking something that's present in culture and twisting and contorting it and making it something that it never initially was. And I think that's what he did with punk music, punk rock music, using the New York template as his working model, the New York Dolls and the Ramones and groups such as this. So he created the Sex Pistols, patched them together as a kind of boy band in the way you might One Direction or somebody of that ilk, just got the various members from different places and put this group together. And punk music for a brief period came to replace rock music, which had been there before it, primarily progressive rock, prog rock.
Yeah.
So punk rock at the tail end of 76 gave what many considered to be the staid, sort of quite boring, quite self-obsessed world of progressive rock a real kick up the arse. And it completely changed the musical landscape for a short while, aided by DJs like John Peel on Radio 1, who became champions of punk and really pushed those scenes. And punk flourished for not very long, really, about 18 months, 2 years max, at the hands of the Sex Pistols, and then groups like The
Yeah.
Clash and The Damned and others, Generation X, Susie and the Banshees, that came off the back of them. And then you got post-punk and new wave, and that gave way to like two-tone and then new romantic stuff and synth pop. But none of these scenes lasted that long. And you can define them by the years that they were active. So
Is
every
it,
few years, the scenes
it's
would get updated.
so I was going to say, yeah, that was the question. Are they deliberately collapsed so that something else can come and
Yeah.
displace it, or is it just an organic evolution? Because like, for me, garage was an organic devolution, or what you want to call it. It naturally came to its end, and then something it starts to evolve into something else. It became grime just because that was the zeitgeist, that was the vibe of the music and the people at the time. But are you saying it was a social engineer effort to collapse certain genres and then reintroduce something else?
Well, I think this is what they do.
Right.
Controllers, call them what you will.
Yeah.
And as an analogy, think about the fact that they constructed the World Trade Center towers in the late 1960s. And these stood as emblems
Hmm.
of the control system that was around at that time. It was like a calling card. They were very occult in nature, the twin pillars of Freemasonry, to put that slant on things. But what did they do after 33 years? Nice Masonic calling card. 33 years after construction began on the World Trade Center towers, they brought them crashing to the ground in an occult ritual. So all that money and all that resource and all that energy and everything that they'd stood for, everything that they had fulfilled those 3+ decades, they were prepared to destroy all that because it suited their agenda to do so. And so out of the destruction came the next phases of their agenda in 2001. What about the Georgia Guidestones? So they stood from 22nd of March 1980, when they were first unveiled, to, was it 2023? I think it was the summer of 2023, when they were systematically destroyed with some sort of missile strike
I
in the
didn't
middle
know
of the
that.
night.
I didn't know
Yeah,
that. I thought they were still there.
it was about 3 o'clock in the morning, something like that.
Hmm.
And there was some sort of missile which was launched at the Georgia Guidestones. And they'd stood there for 4+ decades, and inscribed on them in 7 different languages was a wish list of what the occultists, the controllers of organized society, wished to achieve through their New World Order master plan. And some people have surmised that the reason they destroyed them is because by that point they felt they were so far along the way to getting everything achieved that they'd wanted to, that they'd inscribed in the stone as them expressing their wishes, that these stones no longer needed to stand because they're already on their way. They're going to get there. They don't need to have it as a wish they put out to try and manifest in creation anymore. But either way, they created the Georgia Guidestones, served them well for many years, then they destroyed them.
What
Did the same with the World Trade Center towers.
that's what you
Mhm.
mean by the ritual, right? Because that's what you're saying there. It's
Destruction ritual, yeah.
that's the closing of the loop of the ritual. Like all these
Right,
rituals, they have to end with some kind of symbolic finish to it. Whether
right, right.
even little ones would be like, you sort of burning something and then planting it in the ground or something like that. But I think for the 9/11 was like the collapsing of those the twin towers, almost like the collapsing of duality itself to almost reset the simulation of whatever you want to call it to a new agenda, a new timeline, whatever they want, but based upon
Right.
that kind of ritual. And that's that destruction ritual. That was the ending of the old timeline they wanted, creating the new one they want.
So what if they're doing that with genres and scenes as
Right. So
well?
now yeah, okay.
And so they'll create the euphoria of the dance music scene. And I've
Mm.
often thought about this. I didn't used to go raving. I used to go to clubs, but I wasn't a raver to the point that I'd be up on the podium with my shirt off, swigging bottles of Lucozade and popping pills all night. But I know many people that did. And I know that many of these people are struggling now in their lives.
Mm.
And part of what they're struggling with is realizing that they're never again going to be able to live up to the sheer euphoria of those
Mhm.
fantastic, wonderful, amazing times that they used to enjoy in their lives. That was the ultimate peak, the ultimate high point, excuse the pun, and they're never going to get there again. So they're now in middle age. Many of them have got health problems. Many of them have got mental health problems. Many of them are bogged down with family issues, home life issues, relationship issues. And they think back to those wonderful times and think, oh God, I wish I could go back. But you know, you never can. So I think part of why they create these scenes and make them so great for the time that they're at their high point is in part to demoralize people and to send them crashing down to the ground in terms of their spirits and making them realize that the best years of their lives are over and they're never coming back. I did a presentation at the Uprise and Shine conference, I think it was in 2023, which I called Nostalgia Side. That's a term that I've just coined myself. And I used four of the big megastars, pop stars of the 1980s as examples to illustrate the point. So it was Michael Jackson, Prince, Whitney Houston, and George Michael. And you could throw Madonna into the mix as the fifth biggest name, I guess, of the decade. I think most people would agree that those five names were the five biggest sort of solo music artists from that decade. And Madonna is the odd one out because she's still alive. So they got rid of the other four.
Mm.
And I was presenting the idea that they may have deliberately got rid of these four artists to destroy the nostalgic attachment that so many millions of people felt to them.
Mm.
They defined their youthful years. They defined growing up in the 1980s. And now four of those five names are no longer with us. So it's like it's destroyed that attachment, that very personal attachment that so many people would have felt to those times and those artists and those points in their lives. And again, they realize that it's never going to be that good again. Those times are never coming back because a lot of what the social engineers do to us through societal mind control is weaponizing psychology. They weaponize our own minds
Yeah.
against us. So it would be just like these sick, diseased maniacs to use psychological techniques to cause us to feel dispirited, depressed, just as if we're never going to get those great points in our lives back again. I think this is very sophisticated psychological trickery that behavioral scientists would know exactly how to utilize and use against the masses. And I think that's what they've been doing.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, well said, mate. Well said. No, it's powerful stuff. It really is because, yeah, you're talking about the genres. So if we think punk was, they're not just sounds, they're identity containers. I think you might have referred to it as that. But, like punk was like rebellion, hip hop, it's like truth telling, street power, house is like euphoria, unity, grunge, maybe, some kind of, I don't know, would it be introspection or that kind of thing? And people,
Nihilism.
yeah, maybe a lot of that going on as well. Yeah, I know I was never into grunge to be honest with you, but I think you're right that that music people identified with that, and then correspondingly, as that genre collapses or fades away, that also affects that person as well because they're so intrinsically attached to that genre, right? And so that would have that effect. And then I'm wondering whether also, the hybridization of genres might also potentially affect that person because it's not deeply anchored into any kind of unique heritage. So that when you hybridize the music and get people to identify with that, you're almost identifying them with a hodgepodge kind of signal or signature, energetic signature, which they can't really fully relate to. And that might also fragment them as well, their own psyches. Just another thought.
Yeah. And another one would be I mentioned how we've had these different fads and trends and scenes that have come along every few years. And you could probably take it back to the mid 50s, I guess, with the advent of rock and roll music,
Mm.
sort of 1954, 55, Bill Haley and his Comets, Elvis Presley, Chuck Berry, and all these artists. And then you could take it all the way through the 60s, the British invasion, the Mersey beat bands, then the hippie countercultural stuff of the 60s. Into the 70s, you've got rock music, heavy rock music, progressive rock. Then you've got punk and new wave comes along. Then you've got two-tone and new romantic and synth pop going into the 80s. And you've got dance music coming at the tail end of the 80s. House music comes in, hip hop. You're going into the 90s, you get trance and big room EDM, electronic dance music, UK garage, drum and bass. You're getting into the early 2000s, and then it all just starts to go away, really. How many specific genres can people think of which characterize culturally the years of the 2000?
I was
I've
going
just
to,
mentioned
I was
I've
going
just
to ask you
mentioned
about
so
that.
many. I've
Yeah,
just mentioned
I
so
know.
many there from the 50s through to the 90s. How many genres have come along since the year 2000 which are very specific and distinctive to these times and have got their own label? They've got their own dress code,
Mm.
their own way of behaving, the way of speaking, way of dressing, way of expressing yourself. I can't think of that many.
No, there aren't many. There aren't. I was thinking maybe on the underground, maybe a few, but like grime bassline, maybe. I don't know some of these, but in terms of it in the mainstream, you're right, there aren't any. I think that's because that was the advent of the whole Simon Cowell
Mm,
pop band engineering.
right.
That was the early 2000s when that stuff started to
Mhm.
come up. I think it was Pop Stars and Pop Stars the Rivals was the maybe the first ones, right? The Will
I
Young
remember
stuff.
a lot of
Okay.
these reality TV shows came in the year 2000. So Big Brother
Yeah,
started on TV in 2000. So
right.
it's like the minute the 90s clicked
Mm,
over into the 2000s, all this stuff started to come in. That's when you had these things like well, the X Factor and Britain's Got Talent, these so-called talent shows. Then you had things like MasterChef and the Great British Bake Off, these competitions,
mm,
reality TV basically, where they're
yeah.
just using regular bods off the street and turning them into the TV stars. And so the culture was starting to change. And you had shows like The X Factor, which, as you say, were designed to take all these really bland, really insipid, really uninspiring, often very untalented wannabe rock stars, pop stars, and make celebrities of them when there's no talent there. And as the 2000s has worn on, the ability to pinpoint specific genres and scenes has got more and more difficult. So I guess in the early years of the 2000s, you had bassline and baseline house and these
Mm,
different dubstep and
yeah.
these different names. But then you go to 2010 and you're starting to struggle a bit. 2015, what's been new since 2015? And then 2020, are there any new styles in the 2020s?
No.
Is there anything that we can pinpoint as being its own distinctive expression of culture? It's like everything has become one big hodgepodge of just homogenized
It's postmodernism for
nothingness.
music. It's postmodernism for music. Is basically what it is. And I think I don't know which. Again, it's not. It's like the drugs or the music. I'm not sure which one came first, chicken or egg. But it's like um, we're now at a time, and you can see this with the fragmented identities that we see with everyone. You know, the subjective over objective reality, and I self-identify as a dragonkin and whatever it is, a twin flame, all that kind of stuff. That has also, at the same time, bubbled up simultaneously with the kind of postmodernism in music. For instance, the fragmented non-identity music that we see. It's just a hodgepodge, like you say. It's just a kind of a smorgasbord sludge of all different styles and repeated beats and rhythms and stuff like that. There's no real kind of anchor like you used to have. There used to be like actual banners and anchors to the music. Now it's just a kind of a yeah, just a kind of a sludge, right? But I think that actually kind of pairs up with the actual society and the way people are very fragmented and don't really have a like a core anchor point in their lives as well.
And also, a lot of why all the music sounds the same. Literally, this is not my
Yeah.
dad from 40 years ago moaning. This is observable,
Mm,
testable, repeatable. It does sound the same, and that's because a lot of the songs are getting written by AI
yeah.
and they're being created by committee. So whereas you used to have one or two names in the songwriting credits of any given record, now you'll find 12, 14, 16 names because a committee is sitting around saying, oh, we need this hook here and this melody would work here. And we'll have them going la, 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 la here. So it becomes an earworm and works its way into the consciousness. And the algorithm states that we need this pitch here and we've got to get this reference in here. And they're making music by committee. It's agenda music. It's not being written because the music maker had something genuine and sincere and organic that they wanted to say from their heart, which used to be the case in terms of how music got created. But so much of it is being done by AI, it's templates, it's algorithms, and it really does sound all the same. You can listen to a radio station now. I can't stand to listen to the radio anymore, haven't for many years. And often you can't tell when one artist has given way to the next.
Yeah, they're
I can't
clones.
anyway.
The music is cloned. It's just yeah, a regurgitation. It just feels regurgitated. There's no unique rebellious spirit anymore. And I think all genres, isn't there like an inception where there's like a rebellious icon, someone that comes along and is a bit of a trailblazer, paradigm shifter, but it feels as though they have almost been squelched out of the music scene. And I don't
Well,
know
it's
if
Ed
that,
Sheeran, mate. That's who it is.
how do
Ed
you
Sheeran's
mean?
that trailblazer. He's that dynamic.
Oh God.
Yeah, he's blazing a trail. Yeah. So, I
Mm,
mean, if Ed Sheeran is the number one artist out there, it just tells you everything you need to know about how it's gone down the crapper.
yeah. Can I ask you about by the way, I'm really enjoying the chat, Mark. I feel like we could go and feel like we could actually go and
It's a
like
different
about
kind of chat, isn't it, to the one I normally have? So it's good.
yeah, and we could actually go in about a million different strands right now, but it's kind of that's why it's really interesting to me because I don't really know where it's going to go. But I, I'd like to sort of talk about the frequency of the music, and also I want to circle it back to something you said earlier about um, what actually is going on potentially in venues. It's it's almost like it's a circuit board as well, and there's an actual energy system going on there, potentially being harvested as well. And you actually mentioned these kind of the watchers, the people that are standing there, and I actually think whether on an occult level whether they're there just because they're part of the DJ setup or whatever. But it's almost like some of these people are energy masters and they're acting almost like capacitors within the circuit board, and they're able to modulate the energy of the room and either absorb that energy, harvest that energy, or kind of bounce it back with an open heart and kind of beam more love, heart energy into it to kind of radiate and mirror back the energy of the room to kind of uplift everyone. But I don't know if that's going a little bit too deep. You've got to go into that, but that's just something my observations.
Yeah, well, you may have something there, and it sounds like you would know more about that aspect of things than me. I'm thinking more of shady sort of government military types that are going to be hanging
Right.
out in the shadows of clubs and raves and stuff, and they're going to look totally out of place because they're not ravers, they're not there for the party, they're there to do a job and
Mm.
observe what's going on. I've got a scene in my novel, The Cause and the Cure, in the very final chapter. This is my allegorical piece of truth fiction that I put out in 2019. And the very end of it is set on a full moon beach party in Goa. So it's like one of these trance parties. And you've got all these people dancing open air in the middle of the night, just enjoying themselves, the free spirit of the party, the Goa party scene from the 90s. And you've got a couple of what are quite clearly agents that are standing around. They're wearing Hawaiian shirts and dark glasses, and they're
Yeah.
trying their best to look like
Yeah.
ravers.
Yeah. You can
It's
always
like
tell.
they
You can always spot an undercover cop, can you?
exactly, yeah. They've put on what they think is going to make them blend in,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
nobody will notice they're there, but they stand out like a bloody sore thumb. And
Mm.
all the ravers are giving them a completely wide berth because they know they're dodgy, man.
Mm.
Something about these guys, they're wrong. So they're dancing away from them and just ignoring them. And what I'm getting at there is the fact that these party goers know that these guys have no place being there. And this goes back to those earlier comments that I referenced, where people that were in attendance at raves were saying that they felt like they were being watched and it just felt unnatural. So
Yeah.
that's the side of things that I think
Yeah.
goes on.
Because it's a fine line, isn't it? Because I mean, I know that there's a cult. There's an occult aspect to a lot of institutions. Well, nearly all of them, right? But that's just something that I noticed. Sporting events, for instance, as well. Yeah, clubs. I think that they're actually positioned on ley lines, vortexes, so kind of on the electromagnetic node of the field, right? Because they're able to pull in the energy that's created in those environments. And if you think about the way clubs are set up, they are actually set up like a ritual. And you have the smoke machines and the lights, and you have the kind of the one that's starting off the ritual, the DJ. They would call them the gods, whatever. And so that's lots of what's going on. And so when you have that euphoria building up, that that energy, especially from the drugs, and everyone's in that susceptible state because they're kind of on the drugs as well. That energy is able to be kind of looshed off, like to be harvested. And I don't know if you've kind of gone into that at all yourself, but same with a football stadium. You've got all these people pumping negative and positive emotions into the, into the crowd at the same time, all in a kind of in a dome. And then you've got, I mean, you even call it, on a pitch, it's music, right? And then when you put it in the net, it's a score. These are all musical terms. It's like sound, maybe all that sound vibrations being harnessed as well into that kind of encoded into that kind of information energetically, and then somehow loosed from that. I don't know if you've ever explored that in your own work.
Yeah, you make some very good observations there. In my other subject area that I research majorly besides the music industry, I'm getting into big questions about the true nature of this realm. And so I'm studying the idea of loosh energy, which
Mhm.
is being generated by us when we're kept in conditions of duress and pain and suffering and hardship. So all those fear-based emotional states, despair, regret, grief, anger, frustration, bitterness, all of that carries a frequency and it
Mhm.
all gets put out there into the ether. And I'm studying this idea that there could be entities which reside outside of human perception, which can feed off this stuff and use it as a form of sustenance. It's known as loosh energy. But as well as the fear based stuff, all the bitterness and the sorrow and the hardship, I think also heightened emotional states at the other end of the scale could be getting looshed off, fed off, harvested. So, like you say, at football games, when somebody scores and the energy levels just go through the roof. And if you're watching one of these games in a bar or on TV or something, sometimes you can feel the hairs stand up on the back of your neck, such as the energy that's being generated by the crowd, the response from the crowd. And it would be the same at many of these big raves, especially when the track goes off, it's built to its crescendo and the euphoria levels go through the roof and all the ravers just start going crazy. The joy that's being expressed at that point, the high emotional levels, could be getting harvested off in exactly the same way. It's just a different type of energy resonating at different frequencies.
Well, you could
And
look at, you could sort of go on. I was just gonna say it's like Monsters Inc. I was just gonna say.
well,
So
yeah, that's the plot to Monsters Inc.
yeah.
It's also the plot to what's that movie about the witches with Bette Midler set in Salem? What's that
Oh,
called?
the oh God, the three of them.
Yeah,
Um,
I forget what
oh,
it's called.
Deadly.
Uh, Can't remember the name of it, but it's got Bette Midler in it,
Yeah,
and they're three witches from Salem, Massachusetts,
yeah.
and they're feeding off the fear that children generate when they're about to be sacrificed, and it's horrific because we
Mm.
know that this sort of stuff really goes on, and they put it
Hocus
there in a
Pocus.
hocus
Hocus.
pocus. That's the
Sorry,
one.
sorry. Yeah,
That's the one.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
yeah, they're telling you there in that film that's dressed up
yeah.
as some quirky, goofy Halloween sort of entertainment for kids, but
Mm,
actually, no, that is what goes on, sadly, in aspects of society.
mm,
I've got a section in this new book called The Gatekeepers, where I'm shining the spotlight on five very prominent DJ names from the electronic dance music field. So they're very familiar names: Pete Tong, Judge Jules, Paul Oakenfold, Carl Cox, and Fatboy Slim, Norman Cook. And in the Oakenfold section, I'm considering why it was that his career went stratospheric over and above all his competitors from that time, because he's never struck me as the most talented of DJs. He's never struck me as the brightest, sharpest of individuals either, shall we say, in interviews and such.
mm,
So there's got to be a reason why he was selected for such an amazingly successful and influential career as he's had. And it's involved him playing gigs in some very notable parts of the world. So, years and years ago, he played the world's first ever DJ gig on the Great Wall of China. He also played base camp at Mount Everest. And a few years ago, Carl Cox and Paul Oakenfold together played a gig at Stonehenge,
mm.
right in the middle of the circles.
Oh, right.
And I remember in the early days of rave culture, there were events which used to happen at Hackpen Hill near Marlborough and Silbury Hill and some of the Avebury, some of these magical sites in Wiltshire. And you mentioned ley lines there, earth energy.
Yeah.
grid systems. That's got to be what's going on here, particularly somewhere like Stonehenge. Why would Oakenfold and Cox be playing electronic dance music in the middle of the circles at Stonehenge? Because we know that monument is situated at a very important point in the Earth's energy grid system. So the only logical answer, as far as I'm concerned, was that they were trying to flood the energy ley line system with whatever frequencies were coming out of the music that they were playing. Why else would you have a gig at that point on the Earth's vortex system? And why would Oakenfold be playing the Great Wall of China? And why would, events of this nature be happening? Judge Jules played at the pyramids in Egypt on the Giza Plateau some years ago. So, got to be something going on here.
Yeah, I've actually heard that Stonehenge is Stargate as well. That's also why it's so significant. In terms, it's like a portal. Rather than just being just a ley line, it's actually a portal which actually holds even more kind of power, if you like, high energy. It's like even the highest energy vortice or node, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, and then they must be pumping in their music, which is riddled with negative frequencies. The words itself are negative sigils, which are all once received from the people listening to it affects everyone on that level, right? Because it works mimetically, even in the language within their songs, and so or in pop music in general. And so that's not just affecting us individually, but it's affecting the collective consciousness that are picking up on that. You might be in the gym listening to a Paul Oakenfold song, and you're kind of absorbing the mimetic information that's made from that. So yeah, I think that's, and then by doing it on the ley lines and nodes, it's probably pumping it in more effectively into the Earth's lattice electromagnetic field, whatever you want to call it. Yeah.
Yeah. And fans of these DJs and these scenes will be horrified to hear these suggestions. They'll be like, how dare you suggest that Paul Oakenfold's doing something nefarious with the music that he plays? He's my god. He's my
Mm.
hero.
Yeah.
But I think that goes into what I spoke about earlier, the attachment that people have towards their heroes, their own personal icons. And
Yeah.
everybody's got them. In my case, it was DJs. It sounds like you've looked up to some DJs yourself.
Yeah.
And there'll be many people that aren't at all into DJ culture or club culture. They know nothing about DJs, but they're probably into rock bands.
Mm.
So their heroes are going to be some very different names. But everybody's got someone that they look up to. And you have a high level of attachment to these people. I mean, I used to look up to Pete Tong. He used to be an inspiration to me as a radio DJ. And also Tim Westwood, which I'm a bit more ashamed to admit. But I used to, revere these guys. But I've had to let them go because I realized that neither of them were who I thought they were. And it was tough to let them go because they were heroes of mine. But I had to do it. And if we're going to be mature and if we're going to be grown up and sensible about this, then we have to accept that there might be a few names and a few aspects of our past that we're going to have to cut the attachments to, sever the ties, and move on, chalk it up as experience, look upon it as a positive thing. You learnt some stuff. You're wiser now. You're wiser now than you were back then. Now you know better. You can make better decisions. That's the way to look at it. Don't look upon it that you were cheated and fobbed off, because we all were. There's no point in beating yourself up about how you were mugged off. Everyone's been mugged off. The dignity comes from acknowledging that it happened and now being able to move on and knowing better for next time.
Brilliant. And yeah, and to know better the next time, people can start with the book. Mark, do you want to flash it up again? Let's just give it another plug.
Well, I will do,
Um,
yeah. No One's Dad's a Plumber. So that's it. It's the fourth book in the Musical Truth series that I've had out for the past 10 years now. And you mentioned at the start of the show, a lot of people don't like it when guests start talking about books and they say things like, you shouldn't be selling books, you should be giving information out for free. But
okay.
honestly, in what other walk of life or aspect of society are people expected to give their time, their energy, their resources, their knowledge for nothing, for no return whatsoever?
Mm.
The reality of the situation is that we all find ourselves in the same society. And we all have to find ways of supporting ourselves and surviving and living to support ourselves and our families and feed ourselves another day. And people like us that have settled into this line of work don't have other forms of income. This is what we do, and we're reliant upon this. And it's not as if we're not giving something of value, because I feel that we really are. We're putting out books, we're putting out information. Most of the work that I do for free. So most of the videos I release are entirely for free, but I don't think it's unreasonable to expect that if you're going to put the time and the effort and the energy and the resource into researching and writing a book, which takes several
Mm.
months, you're not going to want to do that for free. You're not going to be able to do that for free. You've got to support yourself through these things. So if people find value in the information, I don't think they're going to really have a problem with purchasing the book and helping to support the author. And that's all we're asking when
Yes.
we invite people to read our books, you know.
Hopefully we can have another chat, mate. Really enjoy talking to you.
Sure.
You know,
Thanks
all
for
the
getting me on.
research you're doing. Yeah, so appreciate
Great
your
work
time.
you're
And
doing as well. Keep doing that. You had Tony Sayers on, didn't you, recently?
yeah, he's a buddy of mine. Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
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 I enjoyed that conversation.
yeah. There seems to be birds of a feather flock together. You'll notice the kind of I feel that kind of all resonating together. So
Exactly.
yeah, our tribe. Cheers, Mark. All right, brilliant.
All right. Cheers, John.
Yeah.